Introducing health and wellness advocate, veteran international real estate investment expert, author and speaker, Adiel Gorel.
Health tips, fitness tips, nutrition and well-being, world-class experts, all right here on my podcast, The Adiel Gorel Show. Hello, everyone, and it's my great pleasure to have James Garrett on this Zoom with us. James, I believe, can offer us a great deal that can move our lives forward in a fascinating field. So without further ado, James Garrett, for more than a decade, James has been studying and teaching the psychology of success and unpacking the brain science behind what makes human beings thrive. As an entrepreneur, scientist, trainer, and coach, he's passionate about, the turning, of academic knowledge about the human brain into practical tools that everybody can use to change their life and the world. Having built a highly successful social startup and having gone through a major burnout along the way, we can relate to that, of course, he feels deeply and personally that we need to change the way we live, work, and innovate. James has spent the past several years building powerful, 100% evidence-based tools that help individuals and organizations maximize their productivity, creativity, and joy. With his wife, Shailene Romney Garrett, he co-founded Think Unlimited, a social venture working to catalyze innovation and entrepreneurship in the Middle East. Their work has been featured in the New York Times, Fast Company, LinkedIn, Harvard Business Review, and more. James's true calling is to bridge the gap between academia and the real world, which is exactly what we need. But his journey started in the lab. His research and writing on snap judgments, self-efficacy, and emotional intelligence has been published in the top scientific journals, including the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology and PLOS ONE. He graduated summa cum laude in psychology from Columbia University. So James, it's a real pleasure to have you with us. And again, I would like for you, if you can, to take us through your journey. What got you started? What was the path that led you, to here?
Yeah, thank you, Adiel. So grateful to be here. Thank you for that kind introduction. So the path is, I felt so most of my young life I did music actually, and my mom was a voice teacher, and so she kind of plugged me into everything music, and I was always fascinated by human behavior and animal behavior actually growing up, but I didn't really fall in love with psychology until college, and I sort of pivoted, I guess, at that point from music to studying the brain and how it works. Still obviously do music on the side, but I just sort of, it became something of a puzzle, I guess. Brains are, as we all know, very complex, and one of the most complex, actually probably the most complex thing we know of actually in the known universe, in the human brain. And so it's a bit of a puzzle. It's mysterious. There's lots of things about the brain that surprise. I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with it first by taking a social psychology class in university, and then started to get more and more interested in positive psychology and that sort of movement, which was young at the time that I was studying, and then became more interested in neuroplasticity and in kind of neural enhancement, or neurotech is kind of where this is going from an ecosystem perspective, brain hacking and neurotech. So I've had lots of different interests, I suppose, over the years, but it's really been for me a kind of a puzzle that I keep finding pieces of and trying to actually understand.
So the Rubik's cube of life.
Yeah, yeah.
Neuroplasticity is a very popular term now, where we are moving from the notion that the brain, once you grow up, once you are age maybe 25, is pretty much set and it's only gonna deteriorate. Although in the last decade, there has been the notion of neuroplasticity, where no, the brain can change. I have an interesting perspective on it for myself because I'm a teacher of the Feldenkrais method. And in fact, next week, we will have here on an interview my teacher, Anat Baniel, who studied with Moshe Feldenkrais. Dr. Michael Merzenich speaks about the Feldenkrais work as physical proof that neuroplasticity exists. So I see that manifestation when you talk to the brain through the body, but you came from a different angle. Like, for example, let's take something very specific. You have a module that people can use and benefit from called Productive by Design. So can you explain it? And I think through that, we'll understand a little more.
Yeah, let me maybe just speak quickly to your comment about Michael Merzenich and the body to brain versus, just focusing just on the brain. Neuroplasticity is the big revolution in neuroscience. It's certainly the most exciting area of science. And I think the reason it's exciting is because when you learn about it, the emotion it evokes is hope. Hope is something that I think a lot of people want a little more of these days. And it's future oriented, right? Meaning that the actual technical definition from Shane Lopez's research when it comes to hope is belief that the world will get better and that I have the ability to make it so. So you have to have both things in order to have the emotion of hope. You have to actually believe that you're the active ingredient to bringing about that better world that you hope for. Otherwise, it's just wishful thinking. And so it's a very action-oriented word, interestingly. And what's so powerful, I think, about neuroplasticity is it's also action-based. And so another way of saying that, or getting good at the skill of what I think Jeffrey Schwartz and Sharon Bagley and others have called self-directed neuroplasticity, is realizing, oh, I can not only change my behaviors, which is awesome, right? I can become a behavioral designer or a behavioral architect in my own life, but I can also rewire my own brain in the process. So, there's this lovely phrase, Jason Silva, actually, often will say this. I'll modify it a little bit. He says cells, I'll say neurons. Neurons are a technology that turn experience into biology. Neurons are a technology that turn experience into biology.
I love this. This is wonderful. Neurons are the technology that turn experience into biology. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's based on what your brain is a product of your life experiences. Now, of course, we come with our brains, there's certain elements of our brains that are genetically built, but it's less than we tend to think. And again, the neuroplasticity research has shown quite emphatically that a major portion of who we become in our lives is actually it's what we do. So Scott Barry Kaufman has this really great quote: personality isn't who you are, it's what you do. And so if I'm, this is a pretty radical idea, actually, within even in the neuroplasticity space. This is a pretty cutting edge thesis, but the idea is that sometimes they're called density distributions. So you have these areas of the brain that, because they get used a lot, becomes stronger, just like a muscle. So if I actually walk out and go to, let's say this isn't COVID times, this is pre-COVID times, but if I'm the kind of person who just started going to parties a lot or started socializing a lot, the fact that I actually do that behavior a lot feeds back into my brain and makes me more extroverted. So another way of saying that is the ability to change ourselves in ways that I think most of us just assume that's kind of just how I'm wired, right? That's,
So,
I was just born that way.
Is that related to the fake it till you make it notion, in a way?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's not that somebody, if you're an actual introvert, it's not that going and socializing is going to feel good, at least in the beginning. It's going to feel awkward. You're going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to feel like all you want to do is go and have some time alone, but or with a smaller group maybe. But practicing that, and again, it can go vice versa for an extrovert to become more introverted or more of an ambivert, something in the middle. With practice, you can basically change that about yourself. Now, again, there's plenty of healthy debate around how much you can change on these things, and I think that debate is healthy and needed. I don't think it's ever appropriate to. I think the danger here is to over-attribute somebody's, who they are as purely a product of just their choices. I don't think that's the case. I think there's plenty of other factors at play including things that are totally out of their control, like their upbringing and their genetics. But there is a strong element of control that we have in becoming something. So if you want to become this sort of 2.0 version of yourself, is one way to think of it. And that 2.0 version is defined by you, right? There is no right or wrong here. But if you're the kind of person who wants to become better than what you currently are, the control or ability to do that through this process of self-directed neuroplasticity you are shockingly in the driver's seat on that.
So, again, I'm going to jump straight to the classic. And I'm sure there is a lot of research about the notion of identical twins. So, identical twins, genetic material, all the base is exactly the same. And yet there must have been some experiences based on what we're talking about now. You take one of the twins, and I wonder if some research was done in that field.
Yeah, there has been some research done in this field, and this would be the camp that would be arguing more strongly for genetic predispositions for something like the big 5 personality traits. And again, I certainly think that there's a strong influence there. I don't think it's to be ignored, and I think that's important to acknowledge and sit with and have that as part of the conversation. That said, I do think within some of that research and in general, what we know about neuroplasticity is somewhat limited based on the tendencies of human nature to not push itself beyond certain boundaries. Let me give you an example. Right now, I'm in a process of trying to reprogram fear in my own brain. So I'm writing something called the Deep Change Project, and fear in it is something that I think is rewirable. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily that I'll never feel fear again. I don't think that's the case. But it's certainly the case that I believe I can rewire my brain so that fear becomes a catalyst to take action instead of paralyzing me. The natural response, for example, for fear, biologically, is to freeze. Joseph Ledoux's research at NYU has shown that we freeze first, we flee if we can, and we fight if we must. In that order, right? So freeze first. So any kind of anxiety or fear, what you're going to actually do behaviorally is you're going to freeze. Now, that's a 1.0 default setting. It's just it comes with the operating system kind of phenomenon, right? But it's not a very helpful one in modern contexts, because most of us, Steven Pinker, among others, have shown, I think, pretty emphatically that the world is safer than it's ever been. Now, it doesn't mean it's always safe, and it certainly doesn't mean it's safer in certain areas. I think certain groups of people have around the world have much less safe environments, objectively. But on average, the world is safer than it's ever been. And so fear, as as an emotion, is serving less and less of a purpose, because the reason we freeze is because it's about safety. But if you want to start a new company and you're a budding entrepreneur, or if you, have, you want to write a book, or you want to do something that's inherently risky and you could be ridiculed by family or friends or whatever if it doesn't succeed, what's going to hold you back? It's obviously fear. Fear of judgment, fear of social rejection or judgment. So that's an incredibly unhelpful emotion in those contexts. And so training yourself to feel fear, and then that emotion becomes a trigger to take action instead of freeze, that's the kind of thing I think is very programmable. And that's what I mean by self-directed neuroplasticity.
Okay, so let's just go back one step. You said that it's been shown that the default setting of the system is first, when you feel fear, first you freeze. Mm-hmm. Then you try to flee, and then you'll fight if you really need to do that. However, I think it depends on the time interval. So if the time interval for the freezing action is really small, maybe the designer of the system had in mind that you'll have a quick moment to regroup and assess. And based on that assessment, which you do, I'm just riffing here. Mm-hmm. In the freezing moment, maybe that's a starting point to what to do next. Flee, fight, start a startup. So I guess it depends on the length of the freeze. If the freeze is a deep freeze, maybe it's not so good. But if it's a short freeze, what do you think of that?
Yeah, no question. No question. It does give you a chance to reevaluate the context, what the actual threat is. And in context of potential physical harm, that serves us quite well. Basically, fight or flight response serve us quite well when there's potential physical harm involved. When it's potential social harm, and what I mean by that is social rejection, being made fun of, being judged, being made to feel stupid, even if that's self-imposed, it doesn't serve us so well. And the reason is because all of those emotions are coming from a place of being pushed out of a group. The reason we feel social judgment so strongly is because it used to be that if we got pushed out of our group, it really was a survival problem. We couldn't, the group is how we survived. Being a cooperative member and being fully knit into that group was essential to our survival. So doing things that were demonstrably or obviously out of, if the group didn't approve, basically, of our behavior, then there was a real threat of not eating. And so that's no longer the case. You can still go to Costco if people think you failed at your entrepreneurial venture. Or you can still, go to the store and buy groceries even if somebody made fun of you. Now, it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt and it's not emotionally painful, and that's totally valid. But there is no survival threat anymore. And so it matters to get our heads around that, because a lot of those motions are purely out of survival. And again, they're not serving any other purpose than to keep us alive from why they're there, but practically in modern context, what they do is just hold us back.
You know, it seems if we talk about that, that people are wired differently about that. So yeah, we can say being humiliated or failing in a venture or being made fun of or, appearing stupid is painful. It hurts because you are ashamed. There is shame associated with it. But it seems like not everybody takes it the same way. You have the Teflon type of personality that somehow seem to brush it off and move on. And then you have, it seems, people that are so sensitive that even the slightest shame may ground them for a very, very long time. How does that play out, in the way that you see it?
Yeah, it's very true. Part of the reason I'm working on fear is I have certain fears I want to overcome. And rejection, fear of rejection is one of those. I think it's a universal fear. It's mostly universal, but no doubt some people feel that more intensely than others. So why? Like, let me give you another example. I have a fear of getting in trouble. It's kind of random. I mean, most people don't feel it, I think, as intensely as I do. And there's like very clear origins in my mind for how that came about in terms of my upbringing. I can have like visceral memories of times when I was actually a pretty good kid growing up. Didn't get in trouble that often, right? So why do I have this fear? Well, without going into too much detail, because I don't want to overshare with people who haven't given me their consent to share, their part of the story. There's a certain there was a certain pattern of getting in trouble or feeling the anticipation of getting in trouble. And what happened in my young brain over time was those neural circuits just got used a lot. They literally were firing more, they're more active than other neural circuits. And so they just got stronger. And so the stronger they got, the more likely it was that I would start anticipating getting in trouble, even if I had done nothing wrong. I would start interpreting people's behavior, and it still to this day haunts me.
You're going to the gym and lifting the weights that's called I'm going to get in trouble, and it got really strong.
Correct. Yeah, any emotional state. So we think of habits as behaviors primarily, but habits are emotional as well. You can have an emotional habit or thought habit. And so that's exactly right. I was going to the gym and bench pressing the get in trouble neural circuit, and that neural circuit just got stronger. And so it's more easily activated. It's more easily triggered by what may be ambiguous behavior on somebody else's part.
That's your go-to. I mean, or at least it was your go-to, because that's but so now, running with the same analogy of a muscle that got stronger, this is one muscle that you want to make weaker. You want it to, atrophy and strengthen some others. So what do you do?
You do what they've done for years with phobias, which is you get the brain to habituate or to extinguish, really, the fear. This is classic extinction therapy. Sometimes they call it exposure and response prevention therapy. So think of fear of snakes. I don't have a fear of snakes, but a lot of people do. Fear of snakes is something that if you were to try to cure that, if you're a therapist, and this is research from Albert Bandura at Stanford many years ago. But what he found was that if you put people in the same room as a snake, they'd freak out. You'd activate those neural circuits, and they'd basically panic. You don't want the brain to panic. What you want the brain to do is feel safe in scaffolded or graded little baby steps. You want it to, what you would do first step in that type of a therapy situation is you'd have the person look through in a totally separate room through a window at a snake in a cage, right? And then the next step might be you would have the person stand in the doorway looking at that snake in the cage. And then the next step might be you would have someone stand at the doorway with that therapist pick up the snake, holding it with a glove or something, but holding the snake with plenty of distance between you and the snake. And then maybe you'd get a little closer to the snake. You get the point. And eventually what happens is people can, when they realize they're actually fine, no damage is happening to them, they're actually safe, the brain starts realizing, oh, we're okay here. We're okay here. And eventually they will hold the snake. Now, this is classic extinction, right? You're extinguishing the phobia or the fear. So by and large, the way to overcome specifically negative emotions is to put yourself in uncomfortable situations that evoke those very emotions. Like if I have a fear of being rejected, and one of the things I've been actually doing in my Deep Change project is deliberately seeking out opportunities to be rejected by other humans and to feel that sting of like, oh, this feels really bad. You know, like doing really weird things. Like I went to, you know, I started out, I bought something from Target and I tried to return it to Walmart. That's completely bizarre. And the Walmart person was like, look at me, I look like, are you crazy? You know? And I'm like stone faced, like, oh, I just thought maybe I could return it here, you know? I asked to go backwards through a car wash, you know, instead of forwards. You know, little things like that are not on the face of them, don't seem like that big of a deal, but we never do them because of social norms. So getting uncomfortable and in a scaffolded way, allowing myself to experience these things and then incrementally increasing the volume on the intensity of that potential rejection over time.
But playing devil's advocate,
Sure.
going with your examples about if I have a fear of being rejected, I will create situations in a scaffolded way of me causing myself to be rejected and experience that it's not so bad. For example, your example with the Walmart and the Target. I would like to point out that there's a difference. And again, this is from my own non-expert view, but I'd like to see what you think about it. The fear of being rejected is also implying no control on my part. I'm not driving the situation. I have no power. I try my best, but you reject me and I'm devastated. The example that you cited, the scaffolded exercise, you are in control. You have the power. You are pretending to be dumb so you'll be rejected. All through the experience, there is what permeates it is, I am creating this, I'm in control, I'm doing it. Isn't that alone already taking away from the power of experiencing that rejection?
Yeah, I think it's a step toward the harder moments of rejection, where I think you're right, when we don't have any control. Those are the ones that hurt the most. But I do think of it like a continuum where they're quality. I mean, if you've ever, so there's lots of other things that I ended up doing and I'm still doing, like telling a joke to a total stranger, you know, which is surprisingly awkward and hard to do. One time I went into an In-N-Out and asked for a burger refill instead of a soda refill. Little things like this, right? By the way, I'm patterning this after Jia Jiang, who did this beautiful 100 Days of Rejection challenge. He wrote a really nice book called Rejection Proof. So yes, no question. I think that there are more authentic ways of doing this, perhaps. But I think it matters. So in terms of control, right? Part of the insight as you go through these types of experiences is just because it feels awkward doesn't mean you've lost any control. Just because it hurts when somebody rejects you doesn't mean you've lost any control.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah, I see that. I see that.
In other words, it's a little bit about who's controlling who. Are you in control of your nervous system, or is your nervous system controlling you?
Yeah.
And that subtle difference can be all the difference in the world.
Well, actually, I mean, we can go more primitive here and say, you could have rejected me and very badly. Now I have a processing unit here with the input coming in. I've been rejected by James. But what comes out into my feelings and emotions is really what came out of the processing unit. So it's really, you're right. I'm kind of, in control. And that's where we go back to the Teflon people versus the thin-skinned people. What goes inside here to process it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's how, and from a neuroplasticity perspective, how strong is the override system, which would be the prefrontal cortex? How strong is that part of your brain as compared to these deeper emotional centers like your amygdala, among others, your anterior cingulate cortex, which is an error detection circuit, these types of things that are on the lookout for bad things happening. And it's not that you don't feel those emotions. I think it's important that courage, when you describe courage, I have like an out there thesis, which is like fear is erasable. That's like my far flung out there thesis. And my more realistic thesis, which I think is fear is overcomable. But it's something that I think you start realizing, oh, this is something that over time is just like a muscle. Like it depends what part of my brain is stronger here. Is it my anxiety circuits? Are those the ones getting the most workout? Or is it the calm and connect system, the ones that are going to soothe me? And it's not that if an act of courage tends to be that you still feel nervous or anxious about doing the behavior you're about to do, but the courage is actually pushing through that emotion and doing it anyways. That's what and in all of our cinema, the way we depict courage, we tend to relate most with those characters who have that ambivalence boiling inside of them, and they step forward in the face of those really powerful emotions and take a stand or do something that's really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, a very visual, example of, for some reason it popped into my mind, is the movie Rudy. So it's easy to make a movie about the strong, big lineman or quarterback that excels. That's kind of a boring movie, really. But when you have a small child, a small kid who has no chance, and he excels and overcomes, we already love it very much because, again, you cross the barrier. It's not really fear in this case, but still you cross the barrier. Thanks for joining me today. Click the subscribe button for more video. Got a question or comment? I love questions and comments. Leave yours below. And here's another video you've got to see.